it really is hard work. And what we're talking about in terms of change is what we know is it's really hard work. It's on the ground, individual, recognizing, understanding behaviors, individual behaviors, groups of groups behavior. Like, it's really hard work. It's not Instagram pretty, but it is possible. So I'm just
it is possible.
I'm totally blown. This is so awesome. I feel so hopeful right now.
Yeah.
This conversation.
Welcome to Agile After Dark, the podcast that addresses Agile topics not talked about in the light of day. My name is Ray Adam Flitford, and over there is Jessica Gelguis.
That's so close.
Okay. Gus DeLees.
Oh.
Okay.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard him say it, right?
Well, because I actually know it. Most of the time I flub it on purpose. Because it gets a laugh most of the time. But anyway, Jessica Gulsk, now I'm not going to be able to say it again. This is Jess. This is our wonderful partner, Jess. And that is Brandon up at the top. And I'm not going to say his last name either now.
I'm Brandon Gartley.
Love it. Gotta love it.
So today I was thinking about, we were all thinking about this. Is something that's close to our hearts, but not just our hearts. I think it's a major topic for any organization, and it's gone through how many evolutions over time, and that is how to change things, corporate culture, or the way people work, or the way people are treated from a management perspective. How to change when change is hard. So how to make those positive changes when change is hard. People are typically, willing to do the things that they've done or fall back on the things that they've done it in the past. So it's very hard to get people to change. And so we want to talk about what the construct of those changes are, the different approaches, the different also environments. You may be in a consulting environment. You may be in an environment where you own what that change is from, P&L perspective. And so I think we want to talk about the challenges, but also some of the successes that we've seen, because we've all seen successes along with the failures. I think there's more failures in some ways than there are real true successors, but I think we want to talk about both.
Yep. And real quick reminder before we get too far, for those watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe or like button, and feel free to comment on the videos. Really appreciated the viewership so far. Really pleased to see that people are really getting engaged with what we're talking about, and really excited to get in this conversation, because to Greg's point, for me, we've talked about the gap between business and IT. We've talked about how do we measure success from using things like OKRs. Those are very kind of tactical approaches and tools in the tool belt, if you will, to kind of get to how we're showing change and so forth. But I think this is a really good subject and a time to have this conversation around, how the organizations that we've been involved with, whether it be small changes that we're able to incorporate and kind of iterate over time. I always use that analogy of we got this big boulder, right? And we got this little rock pick, and we get these little things off, and then all of a sudden a big chunk comes off, and that's really exciting, right? But what if that rock is kind of just bouncing the pick back, and what sort of approaches do we need to take? So we kind of wanted to talk about the construct of the change and the kind of the environments that we're running into. And one of the things that I'll jump off on, and then I know Jess will definitely have a lot to build off of this based off her expansive coaching experience, but kind of looking at, complicated versus complex systems. Like, so we're going into organization, are we looking at a complicated system, which is, if you think about kind of the Industrial Revolution and the conveyor belt, right, of work, like it's repeatable work without too much knowledge, economy type thinking that's required. Right. I put my thing and it goes, and I put my thing and it goes. And the outputs don't really change. There's small changes in input, leads to kind of small, predictable changes in the output. And then it contains largely known unknowns, right? Because in complex systems, it requires being more creative. What we typically think of as the current knowledge economy, the outputs change a lot, right? And small change in the input leads to large but unpredictable change in output. And there are many unknown unknowns. I'm trying to say that. Many unknown unknowns. Yeah. So, and I think that, in our world, we're dealing with complex systems, right? Versus complicated. And even with startups, we kind of always use, it's easy in startups, and it's, in large enterprise organizations. Even with startups, you're building something new. It's not something that's well known, and it's just kind of like you put the inputs in and it's out the other side, and it's very repeatable. So that's kind of the construct from a kind of a system standpoint. Jess, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. Well, I love, I love that you're talking about sort of the evolution of economy, business, essentially, right? Is we have switched from, literally, Ford said something along the lines of, I don't want your brains, I just need your hands, right? Like, just put the thing where I tell you to put the thing. We are no longer there. We actually require, for the really interesting, complicated problems that we're solving in business, we actually need all of the brains turned on. The problem, of course, with brains being turned on is that there are human beings attached to those brains. So immediately, once you add people into a system, now you've got relationship systems on top of the technology systems or the business systems that you're a part of. Boom, automatically you are in a complex system, because just me by myself, you both of you know me, I'm complex all by myself. Add two together and you've got a real wildly complex system. Now add many, many, many more. And of course it's complex. It's interesting, and I'm loving that we're talking about this subject, because humans are messy, and what we're talking about is that messiness of humans and how to help ease some of that messiness. So I'm
just that. Sorry, you and I have had this conversation. I think you might have been that first to say that. I said it in so many ways, but you were the one who really came with that, and to me that is, for me it's the most interesting thing about working through these problems, because you've got to read a room. You have to understand what the motivation are for all those people and how you can bring them together. And that's a very complicated, hard thing to do, and it takes time. It's not just, you can't go in 30, you can teach people how to do Agile or whatever methodology in 15 minutes. It's not that common. Everybody goes, yeah, that makes total sense. But then getting them to actually do it, as we all three know very well, it takes a lot of time. And either, I guess you could go through it in an intense way to do it, like in a 6-week program that's very structured, or you can do it in a longer term, framework, which you're working with probably 200, 250 people, and you got to get the IT and the product people in alignment with the legal people, with the finance people, which you have to do all of that, so in HR. And so, there's multiple complexities that change, but they're all based around humans. And if you don't come into trying to change without thinking about the messiness of humans and the wonderful parts of humans, right, then you're not coming in with the right frame of mind, in my opinion.
I love that, Greg. I love that every department that you named, the back end of it was people, HR people, legal people, engineering people. Oh shoot, they're all people. So we have to really pay attention to that part of it. And I think the other really interesting thing to think about, because we're not just dealing with the people as they are right now in this moment. We're also dealing with the history of people. So we're dealing not just from a historical perspective, but from an individual perspective or from an organizational perspective. Human beings also come with history. And so there may be quite literally ghosts in the system that are saying, like, if we think about, like, okay, we're gonna shift the way that we show up as leaders. Well, the ghost of my system says, but I was really successful in doing something this way. And so that ghost can kind of pull me back into wait a minute, that worked. And then and so there's literal history, there's human history, and there's organizational history that's all a part of. Again, we're talking about, we have to have another word for complex, because it's like
Yeah.
mega complex, uber complex.
Yeah.
Those are the types of systems, even in, like, to your point, a startup, all of that is there and living inside of it. And so just the idea of changing something small then becomes a bit overwhelming. But there's helpful ways of doing it, the hurtful ways and helpful ways of easing that.
Hey, let me ask a quick question. This is a sidebar, but when you were just making me think, Jessica, and we mentioned startups versus larger established corporations. Do you think, and I don't know if we're supposed to talk about this, but I think it probably is valid. Do you think there's a difference in age that enables, like, so the startup I've worked at, which is 3 or 4, it was typically a younger group of people, and so they were actually interested in getting better and changing. Whereas if you work for larger corporations who tended to be more resistant just because it's so hard, those people tended to be further along in their careers. Let's put it that way. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, there's this thing called belief perseverance. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that before, but it's basically that any sort of new ideas are slowed down by how we hold on to our beliefs, despite evidence that shows that it's credible. So even if you give me like all the data in the world, it's like, this is going to like improve how you deliver and the things that you do and so forth, and particularly if I'm like a person, and this is why it's age difference. I don't think it's age, like just age. I think it's like how much you've been in the system, right? So I could be 29 years old, but I've spent my whole 9 years in this system. I'm just as jaded as someone that's 45 and has been in it for 8 years, right?
Yeah.
And so those that benefit from the current system usually have the most invested in that system and resist change, right? I mean, that's just, and it's not blaming anyone for that. I mean, it's just naturally how we adapt to the environment that we know, and we may bitch about it quite a bit, right? We may say like, I hate how we do yada, yada, yada. And that's something we could talk about in terms of change is like, is there, I don't want to get too much in the psychological state, but is there the environment where I can like, feel free to express, I don't believe in this. And that's where I will say, we're going on a tangent, but I will say with the younger generation, they have not been constrained in terms of like, hey, sit in your spot and earn your stripes. Like this younger generation doesn't have that, which drives some people crazy. But in a way, if we're talking about change, it is beneficial. So that age is a little different. But the other part of the belief perseverance, to bring that back to that, is there's also like the backfire effect, which is even worse because your attempts to like present like data and evidence to debunk people's beliefs can actually even strengthen it. Right? Jess?
Sorry, I get excited about this stuff, but so two things is, one, I love what you were talking about in terms of belief perseverance, and what you brought into that is in the environmental factors. And so that leads into, like, if you've ever spent time looking at anything by Robert Keegan and sort of like the immunity to change, is that there may be even a desire to change. There may be I see what you're doing over there and I totally want that. But there's an underlying environmental, we called it a holding environment. It actually pulls us back, like holds us in this same pattern of behavior. So like, simple example, I want to lose weight, right? And I want it. I know that it will make me healthier. I will feel better. I'll fit into that pair of jeans that I wanted, blah, 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 whatever, all the things. So there's big time reasons over there. My heart, all the reasons, right? But I am in an Italian family. And so my environment includes food as a form of love.
Manja.
Yep. But truly, like, every time I'm around my extended family, there's a significant amount of food, and if you don't eat it, that means I don't love you.
Okay.
And so how do you understand those underlying beliefs and behaviors and be able to honor those and still work towards the behaviors or the patterns. I mean, that's a very, very simple example. But again, with the environment, like I was promoted here, here, and here, and here. And now we're asking to change the environment. Well, you're asking me to do this different thing, but I've had different kinds of rewards over here. And so even though I'm reaching for that, I've got a holding pattern back here that's going to hang on to me. So how do I understand that holding pattern and then be intentional about sort of unlocking myself from that, still honoring those things that are important in there? The other part that you talked about was the backfire effect. And I think that is so important, because here's the thing, is that we got here because we got here, right? Yeah. And we wouldn't even be here to talk about the change if we hadn't done a great job of getting to right here. And that means that there's value in what I've done so far. And so if we just say, no, change and do something else, well, now you've stepped on, whether it was 1 year or 20 years of work that I've done to get right here, right now. And so now you've essentially stepped on my value. Like you said, you're wrong.
Wow. On your value. Wow. Yeah.
Well, and we can move on to the challenges section. The last company I worked for, I can give you a to the T example of that, Jess, of all of that. Regardless how successful they really are, and that they complain about the same things over and over again, which don't work. They're like, well, we are who we are. Here's where we got. We're going to go back to the way that we did. They literally like to say it. But we talk about that the next section. I just think I can't. Everything you just said, I've seen in real life, like many times.
Yeah. We have an episode that we did back in the day about management debt, kind of that, hey, I got here this way, and so I'm going to manage this way. So it kind of has like a wave, a domino effect of just kind of building on top of each other. But part of that is, you've got individual behavior, which we talked about, right? We've kind of said, okay, we have these individuals. They're like, how is this affecting me? Which that's absolutely right that they should. Like, what does this change mean to me individually? That's the first thing that they rightfully should be thinking about. But then you have on top of that group behavior, group dynamics, right? And then organizational behavior, organizational values. Like, it kind of all builds on top of each other. And I think this is, again, going with Greg's theme here, a little bit of a tangent. This is where I think I'm seeing a little less of like big T transformation, because I think that people thought, hey, we add enough process and scaling and things on top of kind of metrics and things like that, we'll see the change. Like, change will happen. Yeah, there's gonna be some bumps in the road, but we'll see change happen. And this gets to your point, Greg. It's like, we do have success stories that luckily enough we've all been involved with, but there's also been ones where like, okay, they're going to call us back here in a little bit, once they're actually ready for that next step. But it's interesting because it's such a multi-layered thing that the motivation for change is, again, so multi-layered, and you're dealing with so many different kind of behavior connections and how people think. And we'll talk about kind of, what's the difference between behaviors and thinking. But it's just interesting to me that when we set the context of what change is happening in, it's very easy to say, well, it's organizational or it's individual, but there's a lot of layers to it.
Oh,
I've been thinking about. Go ahead, Jess.
I was going to say, you might even say it's complex.
I know. Well, it's funny. So real quick, Greg, before you go, when you said like it should be something different than complex, the image that came to mind are those supercomputers, where instead of them doing zeros and ones, it's like the waves that they have, and the waves like kind of are kind of solving problems through kind of almost it's like sound wave sort of methods and so forth. That's kind of what I started, is like, that's the level of complexity that we're getting at when we're talking about overall organizational to team to individual change, because it is that layered, right? It is something that you can't just look at in terms of A to B. It's almost like someone was talking to me about sorry, Greg, one more time. Someone was talking to me about they're on the spectrum, right? And everyone kind of thinks about the spectrum as a left to right sort of thing. But the best way that it was explained to me was it's like a color pinwheel. So when you look at the color pinwheel, is that they have certain parts of personality things that are a little bit darker, they come out, that color comes out a little bit more. And it's kind of a similar sort of thing where when we're talking about change, we kind of want to talk about it starts here and ends here. But I think it is something like that where we're pulling out kind of the things for that specific organization, that specific group, that specific individual. So sorry, Greg.
Yeah, well, I understand the whole complexity thing, and I thought about this a lot. But I think if we just did a couple things that are really simple, like put posters of the company's mission statement up. I mean, if you just put them all over the place and on the doors before you walk in and on the walls of the workrooms, whatever, I just think that would solve a lot of the problems. Don't you guys?
I mean, you nailed it. End it here. Let's go sell that. I think actually we don't need a podcast anymore. We'll just sell that.
So is that just now a sticker that gets sent to me at home that I put up somewhere? Because I don't have it. Maybe I'd actually remember it more because I'd be able to reference it more easily than yeah, I know it's up in the hallway.
Free t-shirt, I guess.
Yeah, I knew it was something.
Yeah. Where's that t-shirt that I had somewhere? Yeah.
Yep. Now that we've kind of set the context for, kind of the motivation for change at individual, group, organizational level, we kind of spoke a little bit to the challenges, but we want to dive into that a little bit more. I think it's kind of to make sure that we're articulating, based on that context, what are some of the things we're seeing where, we've got people that are willing to kind of jump in. We've got people that aren't willing to jump in. We've got organizations that say they want to do it, but they're kind of, it's as long as I see some progress and so forth. So what are some of the challenges that you guys see regularly in terms of, we know that we're trying to change, but we're not exactly sure how we want to do that.
Yeah, and I could start with the thing the company that I mentioned before. This is a company that it's actually kind of a half software, half printing company, and they have a lot of problems with the integration of the different printing systems through technology. So each system has its own independent technology. So it's really creates a lot of waste because people are really doing a lot of stuff in between because they don't connect. And so they know this is a problem. They know this is a problem because every year when they get to their busy time of the year, and it's really busy, everything falls apart. And then they spend all January and February talking about how they have to fix everything. Well, it didn't work. They're major problems. They're not like insignificant little glitches here and there. They are major, can't deliver a multi-million-dollar contract because this doesn't work or whatever. So they had tried once before. So then, I came in to help them as a full-time employee and build a product management team to help sort through, what the issues are. And they were very complex. So I was able to build a team. I was able to articulate a change strategy or transformation strategy that I tried to adapt it so that it worked for a manufacturing mindset, even though the problems really were related because they were really good at printing and shipping stuff, right? And that's how they knew that they knew their done state because it gets into a box and it goes somewhere, and we're done. So we know we're successful, right? So I came in and really tried to simplify and say, okay, let's start with one thing and let's try to see if we can what's the easiest thing to fix so we can see how this product management role versus this small lowly analyst who doesn't have any effect over the development, and the development teams just do whatever they want to do for the most part, right? So these are all the typical broken things. Leadership wasn't on board for the most part or at all. My team believed in it, but they were just every day not even being able to make any progress. Fighting with the technology team who would not buy into things because they had their own way of doing things for all those years. And the company has been very successful. It is still very successful, but they don't improve, and therefore they're not innovating at all. And all these small boutique companies are coming in and taking all their business because they can't improve the way that they approach solving problems. They're back 40. These managers are all 40 years in the business. they're like, this agile stuff doesn't work. And I'm like, it's not even agile. Don't think about it as agile. Think about it as Kanban or whatever, we want to call it. Let's just approach the problem in a, more systematic way. I don't think that's a bad word, systematic way. And, so I worked for a year at it, get the team set up, and again, goes back to the time thing. It takes 2 years. If you're going to transform a big company, I know it's 25 people working for me, and then I was dealing with all the other groups, right? It takes a couple of years to do it. And when I did it at another company, an education company, it took us 2 years. We were hugely successful there, and I was completely a failure at this other place. So at the end of the year, they had the big blowout. They had the big same talks about how we're going to change everything and what we're going to do. And they were like, basically they said, no, we're not going to do it that more. Fire all the product people, or they actually they just demolished the department and then put all those business analysts right back where they were. So after that whole year of trying to do a transformation, they just stuck everybody back because, well, you know what? We're good. We don't need to change this. We're just going to stick with it.
So, Jess, I would be very interested in your thoughts on what is the effect. We were just talking about the construct of people and how they look at things. What is the effect of something like Greg's story? Like, what does that affect in terms of how people look at change?
Again, we're talking about environments and history, right? I am wildly interested in and haven't quite gone down this path yet, but I think that might be kind of my next learning and development curiosity. Is I think of this concept of organizational trauma and what that 1 foot in constant, like, we're going to do this and it's going to solve the world's problems. Just kidding. No, we're going to do this and it's going to solve the world's problems. It's like being yanked through change over and over and over again with no real direction, no real change management, no real support systems, no real understanding of the system, because not that Greg didn't, but the folks that are asking for the change didn't truly spend the time understanding the system. No work on like encouraging the work that it takes to do the change. And instead you're inflicting change on organization over and over and over again, which in the long run creates what I like to think of as organizational trauma. And then not only that, but we don't treat the trauma when it's happened. And so instead we just ignore it, right? And what happens when we ignore trauma in a medical sense? Essentially, it festers, gets infected, we get gangrene, and then have to cut off a limb. At best, die at worst. And I think that that's happening over and over and over again if organizations aren't paying attention to the trauma that they've caused in the past. As we said before, there's history already there. And so what scars need tending to? But also, how are we approaching this next series of things that we're going to do? Change is not a bad thing. We've made it a bad thing. Because we're not treating it as something that needs TLC. And to your point, Greg, time. I mean, if we really think about change and changing patterns of behavior, that's that's literally changing brainwaves. We're changing the way that we think about something. We have ingrained, here's how I do something because that's how I do something, because that's how my brain patterns work. And if we're not spending the time on okay, now we've got a new pathway. Let's encourage that pathway until it gets to the point where it's an actual pathway. And that's organizationally, that's how that works anyway, because organizations essentially are living, breathing, massive sets of human beings. If we're not doing that, then we're encouraging one behavior and then knocking it. I mean, okay, now I'm I just have a picture of my dog just talking. It's like telling a puppy, I'm going to give you a treat every time you do something good, and then I'm going to kick you the next time.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. The trauma. I mean, I love that.
Behavior to become.
Yeah.
Well, and then nobody believes in change in the end because then it just becomes the currency is completely stripped away from it. So, it's just like, oh, here we go again, another thing. What's this year's change going to be? And then it's just like nobody can take it seriously because it's failed so many times in the past for all of the reasons you just described, Jessica. And then you're really in trouble if you're trying to change things because they're just like, oh, who's this guy coming in here? Just trying to do
And then,
something
and
different.
then it becomes, how do we do lip service just enough to that, but keep doing the thing that's making me successful over here? So I
Yep.
can do just enough of whatever the flavor of the week or the month or the year is to not get in trouble, but just continue. And it makes those ruts even deeper and deeper and deeper because I'm going to start now. I'm digging my ditch at this point, like because I
Mm-hmm.
see the shrapnel and I'm digging my ditch even further.
Yeah. I mean, that's really
And on
interesting,
the
Jess.
and on the flip side of that, Brandon, you and I had a conversation, or the three of us had a conversation about culture as a culture change as a crutch. And it kind of is related to that, isn't it? A little bit.
It is. So we're talking about challenges. There's a couple of things that come to mind based on what Jess said. I'm still like, I really thank you, Jess. That's got my mind thinking about a bunch of stuff because of the concept of trauma and what that means for people in an organization because it's so indirect, right? In terms of what that does, but we all know that what real trauma does to people in the
I
long
mean,
run. But
Brandon,
yeah,
think
the cultural change piece. Go ahead, Jess.
well, for those listening to the podcast, I'm just going to talk to Brandon for a second because think about the company that when we met that I came into and the trauma that had happened about a year and a half before and how still full of like infestation and like disease that trauma was still causing the people that were there. I mean, that was one of the most interesting, terrible to say that, but like interesting, just literally day one, I walk into the company and I just hear what happened a year and a half ago to the nines. Like the
Yeah.
trauma was so significant and never cared for. It was fascinating. And
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. I mean, and before we get to kind of the culture changes, the crutch thing, that kind of brings forth in my mind that there's kind of that approach of when you're thinking about change that you're trying to change the thinking of people to change behaviors rather than trying to change behaviors
Yeah.
to change the thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's kind of, and that's so tough because luckily enough, we all have like these amazing brains that are very complicated. And as you said, the neural pathways, Jess, I mean, we have kind of the very easy way for change in terms of very like, okay, we're gonna do process. So we're gonna do like explicit learning, right? Which is like that conscious process of learning information through like direct instruction. Now we only hold on to like 5 or 10% of it, right? And that's when we say like coaching is a better way, but that's still kind of explicit learning, right? You're still kind of like, okay, I'm learning from you, like you have outside in, experience and so forth. And everyone's searching for how do I insert change in that more implicit learning, right? Which is that non-conscious process of acquiring knowledge. It's just like because the environment, because the things that are around me and so forth, and that's and implicit learning is actually what's more further dug deep into your synapses than explicit. Because again, like I said, explicit is you learn like 10%. You're kind of like, what was that? How does that relate to what I do? There's a big where implicit is just kind of your mind taking in the
90%.
information that's there, right? Good or bad. So the trauma part, Jess, that's explicit learning, and not in a positive way, right? That really kind of is, it kind of like digs down deep and sits there and then comes out when you really don't want it to. But there can be the positive sides of that too, where it's kind of whether they're aware that the environment has been set we talked about the product operating model and user, like we're instead of saying, go do this, we're saying, oh, we're trying to solve this problem. You're closer to the system. Why don't you solve the problem? That's not a direct, hey, I'm telling you I'm changing this. It's not me saying to you, okay, this is how we're going to make things better for you. It's just, hey, you know what? You're closer to the system. You understand kind of how it is. And here's the personas of the people we're trying to reach. But how would you solve that problem? I'm going to leave that up to you, like the decentralized decision making, rather than making it like, okay, we're going to implement decentralized decision making here, right? Then that becomes more explicit and like they don't recognize that change necessarily happened. Maybe they do, but it's more of like, we all have that kind of, like I kind of have more freedom to do things. I have more. They're actually relying on me more without saying this is now part of your performance review, right? So, anyway, it's a little bit of a tangent, but for me, that's always kind of been an interesting thing in terms of implicit versus explicit, because implicit is how we think about, again, versus the color wheel versus the left to right. Implicit is that left to right, where the explicit is more of the color wheel.
I agree, and you have to connect the humans to their work so that so they can see the change. Because if they're so distant from what's really happening with the things that they do on a day-to-day basis, that they can see the impact of that change directly to them and see how it benefits them and the company. It is so abstracted, then they're just following rules, and they're never going to get that implicit change of heart or change of mind. I mean, when I first started to learn the agile stuff, I was a little resistant to it at first, but once I started really understanding it, it didn't just change my job. It changed the way that I looked about. I had a different outlook around things, And I think that because I internalized, but it took a little while. I mean, trust me, I went into it a little bit negative, but once I got there, I was like, oh yeah, this totally has a different, this changes the way I think about how I interact with people, how I think about work, how I think about my own personal life, whatever prioritization, whatever it is that was important to me, it changed. It really, that was, and I think maybe we're getting back into the next section, but that to me, just connect people to their work, and then demonstrate to them how it changed and what they did made it an impact, a real impact on the finances, we delivered this feature, and look what it did to our growth in this last quarter because we had that one feature that you guys worked on. But companies don't do that. They may not even give a financial update every quarter. You know what I mean? It's just like, I just work here.
Yeah. And I don't want to take away from, I work with people that work in change management that I really admire. I think they're actually some of my favorite people to work with, because they're in it to win it. Like, they're in it because they actually care about the people, and they're not just there to, sell, like, land and expand. They're there to say, hey, I'm worried. You as an individual, you as a team, you as an organization, I'm actually really trying to think about how do we make this best work for you in terms of whatever we're trying to implement actually does for you. That being said, that little caveat for those people that I love is, I wonder how much more of it is kind of what we were getting at, which is how do we set the environment? So, and this is where we get into like culture as a crutch, because I think too much of the how do we set the environment kind of becomes it's a culture thing. And culture, for me is it's not for me. I see it in the people that I talk to. Culture is kind of like, we have, free beer on Fridays. We have, or we have these offsites, or the culture kind of becomes some sort of like thing that's given to them, right? Rather than kind of
culture becomes an HR culture becomes an HR responsibility, or people ops, or whatever you decide to call that kind of group of people. Like, okay, you're gonna go do culture. So what you're talking about, Brandon, is not actual culture. It's you're gonna go do culture. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sorry, Brandon, I would add to that part of that is it's a leadership thing, and it's easy to buy a kit on how put the posters up and do all that. The only way you really change culture is to get everybody's buy-in, And that means a lot of times leaders walking around on the floor or having, walking around, talking to people, getting to know them, showing that it's a different thing, and constantly reminding them, hey, but it takes a lot of emotional energy to do that, and most leaders aren't willing to do that. When I think about the education company I mentioned before, I was out there every day. I was almost never in my office because I was out there trying to promote, hey, look at the good stuff we're doing. Hey, look at, in education, it's easy because you can really demonstrate how kids are being more successful, and nobody's going to argue with education. But I just think, it's leadership. That's the real problem with that culture change, because again, it becomes that do culture. And we're going to take you to the movies every quarter or whatever. It's like, nobody cares. People care about their work. They come there every day to do work. They want feedback on their work,
Yeah. Culture shouldn't be a thing that is a bullet point action list, right?
Yep.
Culture should be what comes out of what the environment is set to be, in my opinion.
Culture is the DNA of the organization. And
it's an organic thing.
You can't do it
so take it out of work. All three of us have we're in different ways and lives in our own families, right? We would explain our families in very different ways, but they're all very good, right? Mm-hmm. But they're different, right? Mm-hmm. So if we were our own little organizations as families, right? Yeah, we got our challenges for sure. But, we would kind of say, that our culture is not set because, okay, we're going to define this is what we are as a family. We're a family this way. No. It's not a conscious thing that you do.
No.
This is how we family in this way.
You're bobbing and weaving. Like, you're kind of like, okay, today I'm staying steady to the kind of, my family agrees that this is what we are, but, we're a little bit lower on this part today. We're going to go a little higher on this, but it's not a conscious thing. It's just kind of, am I coming at the right stance, so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Brandon's has met my family, and I'm just telling you right now, they're not as crazy as my extended family, but their interests and personalities.
Don't get me extended is a whole other. Yeah, that's a whole other culture. Yeah.
That's where it gets complex.
Complex is not the right. It's not complex enough for our extended. I think all three of us would say our extended families is not complex. Is not a word that's complex enough.
Right. Exactly.
But go ahead, Jess.
Before we move, I cannot remember exactly what you said, but it was walking around. It was getting input. It was so the interesting thing. So I'm going to bring a couple of ideas together because I think it's really interesting, right? So you've got an organization that's, here's our change of the year. We're going to go do it, plug it in, follow this process, blah, blah, blah. Versus like how does change actually happen? And it's walking the floor. Again, it literally starts at the individual level, like transformational human level. What's going on with the change? How does it impact me? What's going on? And what questions do you have? And how would you like to see this happen? And so I'm pulling again from some organization relationship systems coaching experience that I have, is that there actually are ground conditions for successful change. And the interesting part is I'm so rarely, it's only 4 steps. And I have so rarely seen all 4 steps completed. But when it is completed, I've never seen it fail. It's fascinating to me. And the interesting part is, to your point, Greg, we're too busy to do that. They should just be doing the thing that we're asking them to do. Like, okay, well, isn't it more costly and takes more work to start something, not do it fully? Everybody's mad. Now there's Slack messages or Teams messages and people having side conversations. Like, the ROI on you not implementing successful change is like, the amount of cost loss is so significant. It's truly mind-boggling. And again, it's only 4 steps. Like, it's simple. It's new information, who, what, where, why, blah, 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 all the things. There's a shared purpose about the change. For sure, most companies do that. We're doing this because, let's take Agile. we want to be more agile. And that's going to help us to improve our business. We're going to sell more. We're going to be more successful. We're going to whatever point at our vision statement that's over there on the wall. Okay. And hopefully you're at least bought into the vision of the company that you're a part of. All right. So there's a purpose. Great. New information. There's a purpose. Everyone has the opportunity to give input about the change. That is where I've seen every leader I've worked with when they first start balk. What do you mean? We can't have a kickoff. Okay, well, I said input. And part 4, everyone understands how the input will be used and the final decisions are made. So I'm going to pull in now Brandon's thread of you're closest to the system. You tell us how this might, how to do this best. Like, right. If you can just squish sort of that together, then the changes that you make are going to have buy-in. The paths are going to be smoother. Everyone's going to understand why we're doing it. We've agreed collectively on how to do it. We've all been heard, because that's a big part. Like, you're going to change my stuff. I want you to hear about why you shouldn't change or why whatever's going on. And I know how the decision was made because I was a part of it. So now I'm a part of the change. I'm not I'm not an outsider to the change that's being inflicted on me. I'm actually a part of the change. It's so rare that it happens because that third step scares people in leadership so bad.
Yeah. And just, I'd add a fifth thing onto there. Not that I'm going to be a part of any authored book or anything, but
I'm writing
just humans are really interesting. Even people who irritate you are interesting, and invest in that. Go around, ask them about their kids or their wife, or what if you see a Star Wars figure in your thing, start talking about Star Wars. Then I'll be there for 45 minutes. But it's like, just go around and get to know people, like, so that they know, hey, this guy's got my back. He cares about me. He cares about something personal about me. He's not just my boss. And they're going to be more interested in if you have that relationship with them, they're going to come to you with more suggestions. Or if they have a problem, they're going to feel more comfortable coming to you, not because you're the big scary boss. Because I always tried to appear to everybody, and it's hard because at some point you do have to make decisions and things. But I just always felt it took a lot of work, but people are interesting. You can always find something interesting that you can latch onto somebody to make an emotional connection, which makes it a lot easier for them to then deal with the work stuff too. So I think but not everybody, I don't think everybody has a personality to do that, or the time maybe, but I think it's really important.
Yeah. Let's use that as a transition. We're kind of getting into it already, but what have we seen to really make things better in terms of change? Like, what are some of the things that we've done? And part of that, what you just said, Greg, I don't want to throw a grenade on this podcast. I don't want us to go on for like 3 hours, but I think some of it is stepping back. Yeah.
Change there that we've missed completely.
Right. I think that I kind of mentioned briefly, like in the last podcast, is when you said we're trying to get there, the organization has to realize what there is, right? And so that's where I use like the competing values framework, right? So it's a 2x2. This is what I have on my whiteboard, which is you have flexibility and adapt. So it's a 2x2. You have flexibility and adaptiveness. Excuse me. Had a little bit of wine. Adaptiveness on the top. You have stability and control on the bottom, right? On the Y. And then you have external focus and differentiation over here on the right, and internal focus and integration on the left. And so the idea is that in the top left, where you have flexibility and adaptiveness and internal focus and integration, that's a collaborate area, right?
It's a value system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
It's Brandon's new SWOT analysis.
Yeah. It is. It very much.
It is a value system.
This is exactly right.
So then
the joke here is for people who haven't worked with me or haven't listened to this podcast before, is that for almost anything that we're going in for a team, I was like, I would do a SWOT analysis. Yeah, I went to business school. I had to like make something out of the money I spent there. Right?
So my question,
but it was too much.
It worked.
I really do want like so my question is, I think no matter where you are in the SWOT analysis, value system analysis, like, what are we missing in terms of honoring the values of like entrenchedness, or like, I don't know, but or like, to me it's like this constant, it's this
where I was going without, you're right. Thanks. I shouldn't have like drained it.
We don't have time. And yet when we're not spending the time, we aren't achieving the thing that we want. We're missing something in terms of like, we know that here's how successful change works. And yet I don't have time for that. It's the same thing we used to talk about in terms of like innovation, right? Like, I don't have time for innovation because I'm working too hard with this square wheel. Why are we not having?
I'll go back to the how we would describe our families, right? We would describe it to each other, and I think this would be true otherwise. But to each other, we would describe it we would say we're in this vector. Like this is what we are.
How we are.
This is who we are, right? Like, we're not trying to pretend to be Google, like we were talking about in the OKR thing. We're not trying to pretend to be them. We're not that innovative. We know we want to move the needle, but we're not going to disrupt the market. Like that's not who we are, right? And so you kind of fit in somewhere there. But that's who we say we are to each other. But there are those families that then also show something on like Instagram where this is what the family that we are. It kind of like blow up what they are, right? And that's what they're and with public companies, they kind of do have to blow that up in terms of, oh my gosh, this is working, because they have to get people to invest. They have to do all this stuff. So it's a tricky situation for public companies in particular, right?
Yep.
Right. But I think as long as you're honest of who you really are, and this is what we see over and over again, not just in the research, but also in our own experiences, those companies that have that rare ability and leadership, Greg, to say, this is who we are. We're not trying to be this. We're past that. This is where we fit. So that's why I kind of point to this. So, without getting draining again, this is where we fit. If you start there with that honesty, you're starting to create that environment that we talked about. Right? Then you can kind of go more to the one-on-one. Jess, that would be my answer to your question. Does that make sense?
You literally just blew my mind. So essentially, if we're talking about change within an organization, when we're talking to those who have the desire to implement change, you can say, hi, really quickly, I want you to do a quick internal scan, and I want you to tell me, is this a change? Is this Instagram worthy change, or is this actual individual transformational change that you're willing to do? If you can get an honest answer about that, then you have a place from which to move forward. If you want an Instagram change, baby, process as all get out. I got templates for you for the 9s.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Metrics.
I got metrics for you, buddy.
Until you can't see anymore. I can absolutely do that. If you are talking about actual individual transformational change and you're willing to do the work, then we can have that conversation too. Either way, I can help you get there, baby. But like, let's have a real conversation about that.
I know what you want to put on the quarterly report for your investors. That's your Instagram. I got you. That we can do.
Hair dryers, we got makeup. I got fake lashes for days.
Right? We got you.
But when the camera goes off, you're still going to be the same.
Yeah.
And if you're about to get arrested because you're actually beating your children, that's on you.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry to take that super.
Yeah. I mean, but that, I think that lends you the place as a leadership team. We're talking about C-suite because those are the decisions that we're talking about, right? That's the starting point. And then to Greg's point, that enables the leaders in their own way. There's no 100%. This is the way you have to do it. Like for Greg, that was walking the floor, getting to know people and so forth, right? For others, it may be, hey, I'm a manager because I'm like the technical guru. I've been here forever. I know everything. Come to me when you're struggling. But otherwise, I'm going to give you the space to figure it out. But I got you. Like I'm here to mentor you. I'm here to help you, right? Or it's the person who kind of like somewhat struggles with. I was talking about spectrum stuff. Like I could see things in data that other people can't, right? That because of just how my brain works, I can see things in a different way. Like help me grow in that space. Like help me help the organization in that and recognize that, right? Rather than trying to put me in a swath of cultural change, right? And I just think that the sooner we and kind of for me again anchoring in that getting people into peak performance and into flow is an easy sort of anchor for that.
This is Agile After Dark. I just like, my mind is blown right now in that. So there's all these conversations at the conferences and all that, right? Is Agile dead? Is Agile blah, 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 blah. No, Agile was just overrun by Instagram influencers.
Yeah.
Like that's what happened. We ended up with a bunch of influencers, and that we didn't end up it, which to me is.
And this is not, we're Agile After Dark, but this is not an Agile thing. I'm just kind of talking about, I think that there needs to kind of be a reevaluation of, it's easy to group when we're talking about like individuals to teams, organizations. It's kind of like, how do we get the biggest swath of change to happen? And I think that there kind of has to be a little bit more of that understanding, particularly the people that are delivering things that are close to the systems for sure. A little bit more individualization, if that's a word, right? Versus, oh, they're a developer or they're a tester and they kind of fall into these groups. And I think, one of the things we talked about in a future podcast, might be the next one, is, trying to get people into either what's called peak performance or flow, right? Each person kind of has this thing where, let's just start with, and it's kind of a swath, but am I a morning person or am I a night person, right? Do I get more done when I wake up in the morning, or to get more done when I'm at night? When I'm awake at night and no one's bothering me and I can kind of just do my stuff. Do I need to be in every single meeting just to make sure that if I happen to hear something that, I'm probably multitasking anyway, that, that information is important to me. And what they find is that the research shows if you get people into this thing of kind of flow or peak performances without interruption, it can take sometimes, depends on the person, but it could take up like 45 minutes to let them get into that. But we've all experienced it where like we start working on something and it feels like it's been, an hour or hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's really only been 15 minutes. And we've just like, we just get stuff out. It's gone. Like it's done. Right.
Or it could be the opposite.
Could be work, could be gardening, could be anything. Right. But if we get people into that, like, shouldn't that really be the goal overall? Because we're talking about like cultural change and so forth. Like, what's the real thing we're trying to get out of this? And, the truth is, as large enterprise organization, we're trying to get the most juice out of the squeeze. But I think we've been kind of looking at it the wrong way in terms of, well, we're going to just put change down on top of people and they're going to follow it. And if they follow it to a T, then we're going to, increase by this little bit of percentage. Whereas if we're looking at the individuals and we're getting them into this thing where you're getting 400% more output, I hate to say it, but you're getting 400% more productivity is actually a better word for it, out of those people in that hour and a half. That's what we should really be looking at from change. So it's a kind of a step back. But that for me, if we're going to talk about where we really see the impacts where change really happens, is giving those people those environments that we talked about and getting the hell out of the way.
Mhm.
100%.
You'd be amazed. You'd be amazed at how smart people are if you put them in the right environments, in the right teams, and how much. I remember one product I worked on. We just essentially, and we didn't want to do that project. It was one of the senior management things. You got to go do this, this product. And we're like, it's a dumb idea. The market's not there. There's already a company that owns 80% of the market. Why in the hell would we go after that? We can build a better product. We know that, but why would we do it? We could do something else. But man, I let that team go. And once the product manager and I were like in alignment on it, and I just said, go do it. And the team did it. And they were the most successful team, I think, that I ever have witnessed. And as far as just doing their own research, building in their own, they did everything. And it was all that room. They sat in a room together, this little conference room. And we got in a lot of trouble for putting them in there. But, they made the most incredible product. Never went to market, of course, because it was a stupid thing to do. But it didn't matter what they were proud of it. They stayed late. We're so excited about their demos, because they got to show cool stuff, and it was kind of a fun product, But I've never seen a group just be almost completely, on their own, automatic, and then come in the demo and go, "Holy shit, that was awesome! That was awesome!" And it was just, and there was just always joy in, even the product manager was a little sour. I love her. She's a little sour, but that team just made fun of her, and she got along with it, right? And they just helped. They got their own groove, like you were talking about. And then it was just, I was hands off for me. I loved going to the demo too because it was just fun, I don't know if that's what you were talking about, but
is that where one team, one room came from? Because it does kind of make me think of like we talk about our dojo approach.
Probably, yeah, probably, because that was what our goal was, and it was really hard to do. But in that particular case, I just said, look, I'm not doing this if you don't put them in a room and let them create their own room and their own decorations and it's the stuff that we all had some access to with where we were, but it was just a great thing. And one point is, as a leader, I was just, and proud is a sort of pejorative word, but I was just so impressed with them,
Yeah.
I mean, it was so great to see these people who were shy when they first started, or who were grouchy, and then, 3, 4, 5 weeks later, they're all just working together, joking around all the time, and it was just, I loved watching that growth as a leader, and it was just one small, and it wasn't even revenue generating at that point, but it was just great to see them.
Yeah, just to say that those people were always there. That those personalities and those things were always there.
Yeah.
It's just they didn't have that's why I was kind of talking about, we're talking about change and that culture as a crutch, because culture makes it like I said, it's like a defined bullet list. Whereas what's our culture is like, we're going to let everyone be themselves.
I have a real question. And also, first, that made me laugh so hard, Brandon, because do you remember the yelling guy? Anyway.
Yes.
It just dropped me.
I had to go off frame. Yeah.
But I have a real question I don't know the answer to. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, both of you. So we know it's been proven over and over that sort of this individualization, this really getting literally the conversations, the direct personal, tie it to individual, all of that stuff. If you do that, these things work that you're trying to do overall. Organizations, here's what you're trying to do. What is the because of course the answer is this: too much time, it's going to cost money to do that. I don't have the time. But we know that you're not going to get to where you want to go unless you do invest the time. What's the barrier to? So what's the miss of the change there? Do you see what I'm saying? There's a change needed.
Yeah.
That we've missed entirely because we're talking about this. What's the?
It's natural. It's natural.
Right?
Yeah.
Real change is possible. Real whatever you want on Instagram is possible. it just takes a lot of hard work to get there. It's not a filter. It's not a, here's the 30 seconds of blah that you get. It really is hard work. And what we're talking about in terms of change is what we know is it's really hard work. It's on the ground, individual, recognizing, understanding behaviors, individual behaviors, group behaviors, groups of groups behavior. Like, it's really hard work. It's not Instagram pretty, but it is possible. So I'm just
it
like,
is possible.
I'm totally blown. This is so awesome. I feel so hopeful right now. This conversation.
I think, and it's naturally going that way. I think it's just, I really do it. Not to stress the Instagram or TikTok analogy too far, but there are those people that are super real in those spaces.
Yeah.
And they release a different sort of brain chemistry for people when they see that, because they're like, wow, that's real. Okay. All right. I've been swiping up to a bunch of stuff. It's like, wow, why can't I go on that? Why can't I do that? Why can't I? And then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, wow, here's someone just being super real. And it creates a different emotion. It creates a different brain chemistry. And it's not to say one's right or the other, but in terms of change for an organization, I think we kind of went through what's the construct, that we're dealing with, trying to convince people of change when they're like, this is the thing I've been in for a while. What are the challenges in terms of, we've got individuals to organizations and kind of it's a mixed bag, to kind of really getting down to the nuts and bolts of any sort of change starts at the individual. It doesn't start at the organization. It does start in the organization in terms of, hey, we recognize this is who we really are, to your point. And then from there, everything kind of glides from there.
I think that's the other part, is this is who we are and this is who we want to be. And then the hard work begins. And again, not an Instagram, but the real hard work of changing patterns. Understanding and like all the things that we've talked about, but actually being intentional about working towards becoming that. We don't just be one thing and then now we're being another thing. There is transformational individual work, teamwork, organizational work, all of the work, which is kind of the fun stuff, really.
But what I was going to say too, just to kind of get on the bandwagon with you, Jess, and both of you actually, is that even I remember having to explain, going back to Agile, going, I need the sales team to understand why Agile is important to them, because it defines how we develop and how it comes out, how the product comes out, is released, how they understand it, how do they get their feedback into us, because they were at that particular situation primarily. And so I spent a year just doing webinars, or not webinars, but like in-person stuff as much as I could, sometimes webinars. I would go out with the salespeople and I would always incorporate a little bit of the Agile thing, even in front of the customers, to say, this is why this matters to you, because you have input immediately. And I would always add a little bit in there, and pretty soon be like, they would actually, now it was like when they went on sales calls, they're like, well, we're Agile, so we can handle that. Like, they actually got it. Like, you know what I mean? But it took a long time. And how salespeople are, they only care about the last thing, lost their last deal last week. They don't care. They don't want to learn anything new. But when I put it in the context of, this is how it's going to help your customers, then they were like, okay. But it took a lot of freaking work for me to do that.
Yeah, I feel kind of back to Agile After Dark, but the fact that the Agile Manifesto was some principles, and they kept it pretty high level. That's a good change start. That's what we talked about, kind of setting the environment, right? Rather than being very prescriptive. Now, all of them went off and wrote their books and like had their different frameworks, right? They all kind of like went from there. But when they all came together, that website is still like hurts my eyes. But they came up. It was very, very simple and sweet, and it was for software development. So like it's kind of interesting because we've certainly graduated from that. But I think that's why we have these conversations that are we're agile after dark, but we're hitting the peripheries of where these sort of things in terms of change really happen.
Because agile in and of itself can't do anything. I mean, it has to be executed and cared for, and you have to understand the context in which people are receiving it. Because why should they care? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
So I just think but it's any system that you want to use or any methodology. It doesn't matter what it is. We just happen to all form around agile, but you have to convince people of why it's important to them. And first of all, you have to figure out why it is important to them. Because if it isn't important to them, then you shouldn't be messing with them and talking about it.
Like new ways of working after dark doesn't really roll off your tongue.
Yeah, well, true.
Any final thoughts or lingering questions that you guys have that we want to make sure that we address? I want to kind of end on like mind blown from Jess, because like that's the most I could ever ask for.
Yeah, I agree.
Delighted by that, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I want to do something with it.
Let's do something together. Let's all figure it out. Let's get out there.
I think my lingering question that I still am not sure about is, why aren't we willing to invest in what we know is actually good, effective change? It's what we used to do about innovation. And now everybody's like, take an innovation sprint and hackathons and do all the innovation you possibly can, because now there's an investment in it. Whereas 10 years ago, it's like, we're too busy to innovate because we're doing the thing with the process with the stuff. That feels like where we are with change and like understanding change is like, we're too busy to be effective in change. I just want change to happen. Whereas like, I just want innovation to happen. It's like we're sort of, if we're doing it right, we might be on the cusp of, okay, now we actually understand that we need to invest in change, and that it's not a waste of time, that the time that you invest in implementing change correctly is actually going to accelerate your business in ways that you never even expected. So I feel like we're sort of on that weird, interesting cusp of understanding.
Greg,
here's Greg. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just real quick, is that I think and I'm not going to answer that question. I think it's a good one for us to kind of ponder and think about. But I think there's something we were joking about complicated to complex systems. I think that there's something, I don't know how you want to, north, south, east, west. There's something further from complex systems. And there's something in there, Jess, I think, and I don't know the answer to that, but I think it has something to do with that. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Craig.
Well, I was just saying, I have a soapbox about innovation, which should be also the same thing for change, is that innovation shouldn't happen once a week or once a month. Every decision you make, every decision you make needs to be thought of through innovation, the lens of innovation. And the same thing with change. It should be thought through the innovation of change, and who knows what's going to happen? That's the beauty. That's the magic of it. But it should be built into everybody, and I wish we could go back to college and like make everybody take a class or something. Although that's direct. Sorry, Brandon, I shouldn't say that. But I just feel like if you can make everybody stop being afraid of change in the same way, the innovation thing, boxing innovation is the dumbest idea in the world. Like, it's so stupid.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too far out on innovation. And it is a good podcast for us to talk about is innovation. But I will say this: I was having a conversation with the.
I have to say this because, like, what I love is this circular thing that we just did here. Is like we were talking about culture is part of your DNA, and what Greg was talking about is making innovation part of culture, which is part of your DNA. And then now what we're asking for is not only that, you complex weirdo humans, we're also going to start to make change part of our culture, which is part of our DNA. And how do we begin to do that? And I'm loving it because I think innovation is starting to get there. We're not boxing it in the same way we were, hopefully. But I think like the next wave of that is change. Like innovation is such a dumb thing.
Yeah.
But culture's been...
Yeah, maybe I'll wrap it up with this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I was going to say, it's just, I'll try to maybe wrap it up with this, which is we talk about motivation for change, and change seems like it's something that you have to like do to someone, or you have to like do to something, right? Which, if there's anything I took out of this conversation, it's really more about change is setting the right environment. We know who we are. We know where we want to go to. Let's set the right environment, because when you're talking about innovation, Greg, I literally had this conversation with the VP today, because they're like, hey, we have this whole thing about psychological safety, which is, it's been around for a while, and it kind of has been used and reused, and people kind of like, maybe because of the label on it, they're kind of like, psychological safety, like, I need to be able to speak up. What I tried to explain to them was like, well, if you're going to look at it from a business context, what you want to get out of psychological safety is you're going to have a crap load of innovation, because you need to have the space.
They're connected. Yep.
For the people that are closest to the systems to be able to express, I have this idea.
I have the weirdest idea.
So it's not a ceremony. It's not a weekly thing. It's not the end of every quarter. It's that they have the space to say, whether I'm doing this thing over and over and over and over and over again, I was like, this sucks. I hate doing this. Why am I doing this every like few weeks? Can't we do something to make this better? They need to have the safety, the space to be able to express that, and someone to say, hey, go for it. Like, you think you could get rid of that? I'll give you some time. Like, sure. That sounds like a reasonable argument for doing something. Do it. That's not a process. That's not a thing that exists. It's, they have that space. They have that environment to do it. So if change is, versus a thing kind of put on someone, it's more like a ethos, or sort of like thing that exists around the people within an organization that they feel very, collective. Yeah. So that's kind of what I would say about that part of the innovation, because I literally just had that conversation right before we get on the podcast. So, all right.
Amazing. Sounds
thanks,
super
everyone.
easy. Should we take an Instagram picture before we go?
100%. I'll do the reverse thing here. Oh gosh, I need to get out the mic out of the way. Well, thanks everyone. Please, again, feel free to subscribe or like the video. If you're listening to us on a podcast, do the same. And if you're on YouTube, please comment and let us know what you think, and we'll respond. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Jess. This is awesome. Appreciate it, guys.
Gus Delis.
Whoa! Nicely done.
He's on it.